Look up for a moment, really look up. We spend so much of our lives staring straight ahead, eyes level with the world around us, that we often miss the secrets hovering right above our heads. Ancient ceilings aren't just architectural afterthoughts, they're time capsules, whispering stories that walls alone could never tell. Picture yourself standing in the hushed silence of a centuries-old cathedral or the shadowed grandeur of an Egyptian temple. Your gaze naturally drifts upward, pulled by the weight of something extraordinary, a tapestry of color, symbols, and hidden meanings stretching across the expanse overhead. These ceilings weren't meant to be casually glanced at. They were designed to awe, to challenge, to encode messages meant only for those who dared to look beyond the ordinary. Why did ancient civilizations pour so much artistry and intention into surfaces so easily overlooked? The answer lies in the very nature of what ceilings represent, a boundary between earth and sky, the mundane and the divine. While walls tell the stories everyone was meant to see, ceilings hold the truth reserved for the curious, the initiated, the ones willing to tilt their heads back and question what others take for granted. From the celestial maps of medieval monasteries to the forbidden symbolism tucked into the vaults of Renaissance palaces, these elevated canvases served as silent collaborators in humanity's greatest mysteries. They were hiding places for knowledge too dangerous to display openly, too sacred to entrust to plain sight. This is more than just a journey through art and architecture. It's an exploration of how civilizations spoke in code, how power and belief were etched into the very fabric of their spaces. Over the next minutes, we'll uncover how a simple shift in perspective, looking up instead of straight ahead, can reveal lost histories, buried rebellions, and even entire worldviews etched into plaster and stone. These ceilings aren't just decorations, they're puzzles waiting to be solved, and the solutions might change how you see the past forever. So let's begin where every great discovery starts, with a question no one thought to ask. What if the most important stories aren't written on walls at all, but above them? There's something almost mischievous about how ancient architects played with human nature. We're wired to focus on what's directly in front of us, the path ahead, the walls around us, while the space above goes quietly ignored. And that's exactly why ceilings became the ultimate hiding spot. Think about it. When you walk into a grand hall, your first instinct isn't to crane your neck. That split second of hesitation, that unspoken reluctance to look up, created the perfect blind spot for secrets to thrive. Take the temples of ancient Egypt, where soaring ceilings weren't just structural necessities but deliberate choices. The hieroglyphs and star maps painted overhead weren't meant for casual visitors. They were celestial guidebooks, visible only to priests who knew to lift their eyes during sacred rituals. This wasn't just practicality, it was psychological theater. By making knowledge physically harder to see, architects turned the simple act of looking up into a test of devotion. If you weren't willing to strain your neck, you weren't ready for the truths hidden there. Medieval cathedral builders took this idea even further. Those vaulted ceilings dripping with frescoes. They weren't merely decorations to impress the masses. Tucked between biblical scenes were subtle heresies, pagan symbols disguised as Christian art, even political protests brushed into the corners where only the most observant would spot them. The higher the message, the more dangerous its content, because in a world where authority controlled what was written on walls, ceilings became the underground press of the Middle Ages. What's fascinating is how universal this tactic was. From the floating mandalas of Tibetan monasteries to the hidden geometry of Islamic palaces, cultures separated by oceans and centuries all arrived at the same brilliant solution. If you want to protect knowledge, put it where only the determined will find it. The ceiling wasn't just a surface, it was a filter, ensuring that wisdom passed only to those who demonstrated the curiosity and effort to seek it. And that might be the most powerful lesson these ancient spaces still teach us today. Real understanding often begins where comfort ends, in the places that make us look differently at the world we thought we knew. The Dendera temple ceiling isn't just an ancient work of art, it's a snapshot of the night sky frozen in time. Imagine standing beneath that vast stone canopy, tracing the same constellations that guided pharaohs and priests 2,000 years ago. But here's what's truly remarkable: those stars weren't painted randomly. Every curve, every cluster aligns with precise astronomical observations, a testament to how deeply ancient cultures understood the cosmos. While walls told stories of gods and kings, the ceiling held something far more practical: a celestial clockwork ticking silently overhead. This wasn't unique to Egypt. Across the ancient world, from Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica, civilizations turned their ceilings into observatories. The Maya painted the Milky Way across temple vaults, not as decoration but as a sacred map. Their priests used these star charts to predict solstices, plant crops, and even time rituals to the minute. Unlike modern astronomy, which relies on telescopes and equations, these cultures read the sky like a living text, and they carved that knowledge where it would last, far from weathering or war. What makes these celestial ceilings so extraordinary is their duality. They served both the sacred and the scientific. In places like the Hypogeum of Malta, a subterranean temple carved 3,000 years before the pyramids, the ceiling mimics the night sky not just for worship but as an agricultural calendar. The changing angle of sunlight through its openings marked the seasons, telling farmers when to sow and harvest. This wasn't mysticism, it was precision engineering disguised as art. And then there's the real shocker: some of these ancient star maps are so accurate, they still match our modern astronomical records. The ceiling of Rome's Pantheon, with its famous oculus, wasn't just architectural genius, it functioned as a solar marker. On the spring equinox, sunlight strikes a specific point on the interior, a phenomenon repeated in temples from India to Ireland. These weren't coincidences. They were deliberate, calculated designs meant to bridge heaven and earth in ways we're only beginning to decipher. So why hide such brilliance overhead? Because knowledge was power and sometimes survival. In eras when star patterns dictated planting seasons or navigation routes, keeping that information slightly out of reach ensured only trained eyes could interpret it. The ceiling became a vault, safeguarding civilization's most vital tools in plain sight. If you knew how to look, step into the shadowy vaults of a medieval cathedral, and you'll find more than just stone and stained glass. You'll stumble upon a secret language carved in plain sight. Those intricate patterns winding across the ceiling aren't mere decoration. They're a carefully coded library of forbidden knowledge. While the walls preached approved scripture to the faithful, the ceilings whispered truths too dangerous for the pulpit. Take Rosslyn Chapel's infamous maze carvings. How could 15th century Scottish stonemasons depict a crop that wouldn't reach Europe for another 50 years? This wasn't artistic guesswork, it was evidence. The craftsmen who shaped those ceilings belonged to guilds guarding navigational secrets, possibly passed down from Norse explorers or Templar knights who'd crossed the Atlantic long before history books claim. These weren't random flourishes, they were deliberate breadcrumbs left where only fellow initiates would recognize them. But the real genius lies in how these symbols hid in full view. Gothic architects employed sacred geometry, mathematical ratios believed to hold divine power, to encode messages within their designs. The ribbed vaults of Chartres Cathedral, for instance, form precise pentagrams when viewed from specific angles. To the average worshipper, they're simply structural supports. To alchemists and hermetic scholars, they revealed the hidden relationships between heaven and earth. Even more startling are the ceilings that double as musical scores. At the Basilica of Saint Denis in France, certain ceiling carvings correspond to Gregorian chants when translated into musical notation. Others contain astrological charts disguised as decorative borders, allowing medieval astronomers to track celestial events under the guise of religious art. These weren't just clever tricks, they were survival tactics. In an age when heresy meant execution, ceilings became the only safe place to preserve ideas that challenged the establishment. What's remarkable is how consistently this pattern appears across Europe. From the dragon carvings in Sweden's Lund Cathedral, symbols borrowed from Viking cosmology, to the Kabbalistic tree of life hidden in Spain's Salamanca University Library ceiling, these spaces formed a clandestine network of knowledge. The higher the symbol, the more radical its meaning, creating a vertical hierarchy of secrets where only those who dared to look up could access the truth. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson of these stone puzzles. Real knowledge often lingers just beyond our habitual sightlines, waiting for the curious to break their gaze from the obvious and search the spaces we've trained ourselves to ignore. Some of history's most astonishing ceiling secrets aren't visible at all, they're heard. Walk beneath the corbelled arches of Palenque's ancient Maya temples, and you'll notice something strange. Whisper a prayer at one end of the chamber, and the sound travels with unnatural clarity to someone standing 30 feet away, as if the stones themselves are carrying your words. This wasn't accidental architecture, it was acoustic engineering perfected over centuries. While walls defined sacred spaces, ceilings transformed them into instruments, bending sound in ways that must have seemed supernatural to ancient worshippers. The Maya weren't alone in this sonic sorcery. Halfway across the world, Byzantine architects crafted domes that could make a single chanted note reverberate for nearly half a minute. Stand beneath the great dome of Hagia Sophia, and you'll feel the air itself vibrate with echoes that seem to come from every direction at once. Modern acoustic studies reveal these domes were precisely calculated to amplify certain frequencies, particularly the human voice, while dampening others. The effect, a priest's words would resonate with divine authority, while everyday noises faded into the background. This wasn't just impressive craftsmanship, it was psychological theater on a grand scale, using physics to blur the line between mortal speech and celestial proclamation. What's truly remarkable is how these cultures arrived at similar solutions without shared knowledge. The Maya used stepped vaults to channel sound along precise pathways, while Byzantine builders employed curved surfaces to diffuse it. Yet both achieved the same goal, creating spaces where ritual music and chants took on an otherworldly quality. At Palenque's Temple of the Inscriptions, archaeologists discovered that certain ceiling angles amplify the sound of rainfall into a thunderous roar during storms, likely intentional, turning weather into a dramatic element of ceremonies. Similarly, the whispering gallery effect in Rome's Pantheon allows two people standing at opposite ends of the dome to hear each other's murmurs as clearly as if they were side by side. These acoustic feats hint at a deeper understanding of sound's power in spiritual experience. In cultures where divine messages often came through oracles or trance states, ceilings became technological tools to induce awe. The eerie echoes in Malta's hypogeum, for instance, produce frequencies that studies suggest can alter brainwave patterns, potentially facilitating altered states during rituals. Meanwhile, the precise reverberations in Islamic mosques were carefully tuned to ensure the call to prayer carried evenly through every corner of the space, uniting communities in synchronized worship. Why hide such brilliance overhead? Because sound, like light, behaves differently when directed from above. A voice seeming to descend from the heavens held far more authority than one emerging from eye level. These ancient architects understood something we often forget. True mastery isn't just about what we see, but what we feel in our bones when the very air around us seems to speak. Their ceilings weren't passive structures, they were collaborators in ceremony, designed to make the invisible palpable and the impossible, just for a moment, real. High above the polished floors of Versailles, where courtiers once schemed beneath crystal chandeliers, the Hall of Mirrors holds a masterclass in political theater. Those gilded ceiling paintings aren't just celebrations of Louis XIV's power, they're a carefully staged argument in brushstrokes and gold leaf. Every sunburst, every allegorical figure positioning the king as Apollo wasn't merely flattery. It was psychological warfare against anyone who might question his divine right to rule. But here's what most visitors miss. Tucked between scenes of military triumph, artists smuggled in tiny rebellions. A defeated enemy's face subtly distorted here, a supposedly glorious battle scene framed to emphasize its brutality there. These were quiet acts of defiance, possible only because censors rarely scrutinized what required a stiff neck to see. This duality wasn't unique to France. Across Renaissance Italy, papal palaces boasted ceilings that outwardly praised the church while hiding biting satire in their shadows. The Villa Farnesina in Rome features a lavish ceiling where mythological scenes appear pious at first glance, until you notice the mischievous putty mimicking clergymen's greed in the margins. Such details escaped punishment because they existed in a perceptual blind spot, too high for casual observation, yet visible to those who knew where to look. The ceiling became the perfect medium for political dissent, close enough to the official narrative to avoid suspicion, yet distant enough to undermine it. Even more audacious were the ceilings of Ottoman palaces, where intricate floral patterns concealed coded critiques of the Sultan's court. Artisans wove rebellious messages into seemingly decorative arabesques. A tulip positioned at an odd angle might symbolize dissent, or a deliberately broken geometric pattern could represent fractured loyalty. These weren't just artistic choices, they were survival strategies. In empires where speaking against power meant death, ceilings offered a rare, safe space for truth. The very height that made them impractical for daily viewing also made them ideal for smuggling uncomfortable truths into the heart of power. Perhaps no example is more striking than the ceiling of Madrid's royal palace. Its central panel glorifies the Spanish monarchy with typical grandeur, but the peripheral scenes tell a different story. Farmers toil under oppressive suns while nobles feast. Soldiers bleed in forgotten wars, images meant for the eyes of visiting diplomats who'd be seated where the perspective revealed the full narrative. This wasn't art for art's sake. It was a visual whisper network, using architecture to ensure that those in positions of influence couldn't claim they hadn't seen the consequences of unchecked power. What makes these political ceilings so extraordinary is their layered audience. Like a play performed simultaneously for royalty and rebels, they delivered one message to those who glanced and another to those who studied. In an age before mass media, they were the original viral campaigns, subversive ideas transmitted not through pamphlets or speeches, but through the very structures meant to symbolize unshakable authority. The next time you stand beneath an ornate historical ceiling, ask yourself, are you seeing propaganda, protest, or both? The answer might depend on how long you're willing to look up. The Pantheon's dome doesn't just defy time, it defies logic. 2,000 years after its construction, this massive concrete ceiling still stands without reinforcement, a silent rebuke to modern engineering's assumptions about what ancient builders could achieve. But the real secret isn't just in its endurance, it's in the barely visible layers of the dome itself. Look closely at that coffered ceiling. and you'll notice the concrete changes as it rises thicker at the base with heavy volcanic rock aggregate, gradually lightening toward the top with porous pumice. This wasn't random experimentation. It was precise material science, calculated to distribute weight while minimizing stress on the structure. Modern engineers only confirmed this principle in the last century with advanced stress modeling, yet Roman builders implemented it through observation and sheer brilliance. What's even more astonishing is how they preserved this knowledge. Those geometrically perfect coffers aren't merely decorative, they're a built-in instruction manual. The pattern demonstrates load distribution principles, showing future builders how to replicate the dome's strength. Similar coded lessons appear in Mayan corbelled vaults, where each overlapping stone teaches the mathematics of compression through its placement. These weren't just buildings, they were three-dimensional textbooks, ensuring that even if written records were lost, the knowledge would survive in the language of form and function. The mystery deepens when we examine how these techniques vanished. Roman concrete, for instance, actually grows stronger in seawater, a property modern scientists only rediscovered by analyzing microscopic mineral formations in ancient harbor walls. Medieval architects, lacking this understanding, reverted to cruder methods when repairing Roman structures, unknowingly discarding formulas that could have revolutionized architecture centuries earlier. Perhaps most telling are the failures preserved overhead. In Persia's Tak-I Kisra, cracks in the massive brick vault reveal where builders pushed boundaries too far, and in doing so, left warnings for future generations. These mistakes were just as carefully recorded as the successes, creating a complete curriculum in structural engineering where the ceiling itself served as both chalkboard and lesson plan. Today, we're still deciphering these material puzzles. The Pantheon's concrete contains rare volcanic ash from a specific region near Naples, while Byzantine domes incorporate crushed pottery for lightness recipes that suggest networks of specialized suppliers across empires. Every chip of plaster, every hairline crack tells a story of trial and error conducted on a civilization scale. The true genius of these ancient engineers wasn't just in what they built, but in how they ensured their knowledge would endure. Not on fragile parchment, but in the very bones of buildings that dared to reach for the sky. Among the soaring arches of Chartres Cathedral, if you know where to look, you'll find a tiny stone hair carved where no sunlight ever touches. It's not part of any biblical scene, just a quiet rebellion, the mark of a medieval mason who decided, against all rules, to leave something of himself in that sacred space. This wasn't vanity, it was defiance. While walls celebrated saints and kings, ceilings became the last refuge for the unnamed artists who brought those visions to life. Their signatures weren't in ink or parchment, but in the very bones of the buildings they crafted, a thumbprint pressed into wet plaster, a distinctive brushstroke hidden in a fresco's corner, or a single mismatched stone laid deliberately upside down. The pigment trails tell their own stories. In the Sistine Chapel, restorers discovered something astonishing beneath centuries of grime: Michelangelo's fingerprints preserved in the wet paint of the ceiling's darkest corners. These weren't accidents, they were deliberate acts of ownership, a way for an artist forbidden by papal decree from signing his work to still say, "I was here." Similar traces appear in the mineral signatures of Byzantine mosaics, where individual glassmakers can be identified by the unique metallic compounds they used to achieve certain hues. The lapis blue in 1/12th century monastery ceiling, for instance, contains trace elements matching Afghan mines, revealing not just an artist's choice but their trade routes and connections. Sometimes the signatures were literal. High in the vaults of Burgos Cathedral, a series of tiny carved faces peer down from the ribs, not saints or angels, but the stonemasons themselves, immortalized in laughter and scowls. Guild rules strictly forbade such personal additions, but the height provided cover. These weren't just marks of pride, they were insurance. In an era when craftsmen were often paid only upon completion, a hidden signature could prove whose hand had shaped which section, settling disputes when patrons tried to withhold wages. The most poignant marks, though, are the ones never meant to be found. Beneath the gold leaf of Venice's Doge's palace ceiling, conservators found charcoal sketches of a child's handprint, likely the artist's own, pressed into the plaster by a son or daughter visiting the scaffold. In the Great Mosque of Cordoba, a single tile in the 1,000-patterned ceiling bears an Arabic inscription too small to read from the floor: "Only God is perfect." It's a humble admission from an artisan who knew his work would be called divine, yet understood his own human limitations. These hidden traces transform cold stone and pigment into something deeply personal. They remind us that history wasn't made by abstract forces or faceless crowds, but by individuals who ate meals with paint-stained fingers, who ached from years on scaffolds, who occasionally, against all edicts, whispered their presence into the spaces no one thought to examine. The next time you stand beneath an ancient ceiling, remember to scan the shadows between the grandeur. What looks like a flaw or a smudge might just be someone reaching across centuries to say, "Look closer." I was here too. Restoration work on ancient ceilings often feels like performing archaeology in reverse instead of digging down through layers of soil. Conservators peel back centuries of paint and plaster to uncover lost worlds suspended overhead. The Sistine Chapel provides the most famous example, where infrared imaging revealed Michelangelo's frantic revisions beneath the surface. Angels' wings redrawn, prophets' gestures adjusted, entire compositions scrapped and reworked. But these hidden layers are more than just artistic second thoughts. They're snapshots of genius in motion, preserved precisely because ceilings were too laborious to fully strip and repaint. This phenomenon isn't unique to Renaissance Italy. In China's Forbidden City, restorers recently uncovered 7 distinct layers of dragon motifs on a single palace ceiling, each dynasty superimposing its own insignia over the last, creating a silent chronicle of rising and falling power. The oldest designs, dating to the Ming era, were preserved not through careful archiving but through sheer inconvenience. Scraping away intricate wood carvings risked damaging the entire structure. Similarly, Turkey's Hagia Sophia shelters 6th-century Christian mosaics beneath Ottoman floral patterns, a palimpsest of faiths etched in gold and pigment. What makes ceiling strata so extraordinary is their accidental honesty. Walls were routinely whitewashed to serve new political or religious agendas, but ceilings retained their histories through neglect rather than intention. In Venice's Scuola Grande di San Rocco, restorers found Tintoretto's original charcoal grid lines still visible under later touch-ups, proof that even masterpieces began as rough calculations. At England's Peterborough Cathedral, medieval painters' color-testing smears survive in the vaults, showing exact shades they considered before committing to the final scheme. These aren't just technical details, they're intimate glimpses into the workshop realities behind sacred art. The most poignant discoveries emerge when restorers encounter unexpected interruptions. On a Sicilian church ceiling, a 14th-century fresco of the Last Judgment lies half-finished, its lower section abruptly transitioning to simpler designs, likely abandoned when the Black Death decimated the artist's workshop. In Mexico City's Metropolitan Cathedral, conservators found Aztec glyphs scratched into the wooden substructure by indigenous laborers, their marks concealed beneath gilded Baroque ornamentation. These unintended time capsules reveal not just artistic processes, but the human story's ambitions cut short, cultures clashing, lives spent suspended between earth and sky. Modern technology is revolutionizing how we read these layered narratives. Multispectral imaging can now detect vanished pigments in Notre Dame's fire-damaged vaults, while 3D laser mapping reveals tool marks on Egyptian temple ceilings that indicate how work crews divided their tasks. Each advancement peels back another veil, reminding us that the greatest masterpieces weren't pristine visions sprung fully formed, but cumulative acts of perseverance, layer upon layer of decisions, corrections, and sometimes surrender, all hovering just out of sight until someone thinks to look up. Beneath the dazzling tilework of Iran's Sheikh Lotfullah Mosque lies a secret language, one written not in words but in angles and intersections. That celestial dome, shimmering with intricate patterns, isn't just decorative artistry, it's a mathematical manifesto. Every intersecting line, every repeating shape forms a precise equation, a visual representation of the infinite. Stand directly beneath the center, and something extraordinary happens. The entire design aligns into perfect symmetry, as if the walls of reality itself have folded to reveal a hidden order. This wasn't accidental beauty, it was deliberate calculus engineered to make the intangible tangible. Islamic geometric ceilings like this one operate on principles that would take Western mathematics centuries to formalize. The 8 pointed stars recurring in these designs aren't just aesthetically pleasing, they're visual proofs of advanced trigonometry, constructed using only compasses and straightedges. Artisans employed recursive algorithms, building smaller patterns within larger ones to create the illusion of endless expansion. The effect is intentional. As your eye follows the patterns outward, they never actually terminate, mirroring the Islamic concept of divinity without beginning or end. What's even more astonishing is how these designs encode philosophical concepts. The ceiling of Granada's Alhambra Palace, for instance, tiles its vaults with 17 distinct repeating patterns, the exact number mathematically proven to cover a plane without repetition. But here's the genius: each pattern corresponds to one of the attributes of God described in the Quran. The architects didn't just build a ceiling, they built a theological argument in plaster and pigment, where faith and fractal geometry became indistinguishable. This marriage of math and meaning appears globally. In India's Ranakpur Jain temple, the domed ceilings feature lotus patterns that unfold according to the Fibonacci sequence, the same mathematical ratio governing sunflower seeds and galaxy spirals. Hindu artisans used these sacred numbers to represent the universe's underlying harmony, embedding cosmic truths into stone. Similarly, the labyrinthine ceiling of Rome's Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls hides Pythagorean harmonics in its proportions, tuned to musical intervals believed to resonate with the human soul. Why place such brilliance overhead? Because geometry experienced vertically becomes visceral. When you tilt your head back to follow those endless patterns, your body instinctively understands what your mind struggles to articulate. That some truths transcend language, communicating directly through symmetry and space. These ceilings weren't just teaching tools, they were experiential proofs, turning abstract philosophy into something you could feel in your pulse as the designs pulled your gaze toward the infinite. The real shock comes when modern technology confirms ancient precision. Laser scans of Turkey's Selami mosque ceiling revealed deviations of less than 1 millimeter across its vast surface accuracy, rivaling modern city designs. Even more remarkably, analysis of Gothic cathedral vaults shows their ribbed arches follow logarithmic curves, a mathematical concept not formally defined until the 17th century. How did medieval masons achieve this without blueprints? The answer might lie in their methods. Many geometric ceilings were constructed using knotted ropes and wooden templates. passing down ratios through generations of craftsmen as oral traditions. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson of these mathematical masterpieces. By encoding knowledge in form rather than text, these civilizations ensured their deepest insights would survive wars, fires, and the erosion of time. The numbers overhead whisper across centuries, reminding us that genius isn't measured by the tools at hand, but by the willingness to see the universe's patterns and to make them visible for those who dare to look up. Descending into Malta's hypogeum of Hal Saflieni feels less like entering a burial site and more like stepping inside a living ritual. The ceiling here isn't just stone, it's a three-dimensional map of transformation. Spirals coil like fingerprints of the divine, their curves leading deeper into the earth while simultaneously pointing upward. These aren't decorations, they're tactile instructions for an ancient rite of passage, guiding initiates through layers of consciousness as surely as a hand guiding a blindfolded pilgrim. Unlike walls that tell stories, this ceiling demands participation, its grooves and hollows designed to be traced by fingertips in the dark. What makes these ceiling pathways so extraordinary is their multisensory design. Certain carved niches resonate at specific frequencies when chants are performed beneath them. Modern acoustic studies confirm this was intentional. The initiate wouldn't just see the path, they'd feel it vibrating through their bones, sound and touch merging to create an embodied experience of ascent. Similar tactile ceilings appear in Anatolian underground cities, where grooves above narrow tunnels correspond to hand positions for meditation during initiation ordeals. These weren't passive symbols, they were interactive guides turning architecture into a kind of sacred technology. The concept of ceilings as ritual maps spans continents. In Japan's Buddhist cave temples, painted ceiling mandalas served as visual focal points for meditation, but with a twist. The designs incorporate subtle optical illusions that shift when viewed from different positions, mirroring the stages of enlightenment. A novice might see chaos, while an advanced practitioner perceives perfect order. Meanwhile, in the American Southwest, ancestral Puebloan kiva ceilings feature Sipapu holes symbolizing the emergence from underground worlds. A physical representation of spiritual rebirth that initiates would pass beneath during ceremonies. Perhaps most striking are the ceiling labyrinths of medieval European crypts. Unlike floor labyrinths meant to be walked, these overhead versions required initiates to mentally navigate their twists while lying supine, a practice recorded in 12th century monastic texts as the upward road. The ceiling became the ultimate test of internalized knowledge. If you could trace the path without physical markers, you'd proven your readiness for deeper mysteries. These sacred ceilings share a common thread. They transform vertical space into narrative. Where walls present knowledge, ceilings require you to earn it through movement, whether physical or mental. The act of looking up becomes the first step of the journey, the architectural equivalent of a mentor saying, "Climb and you'll understand." Hidden in their curves and shadows are the oldest teaching methods known to humanity, not lectures to be heard, but paths to be followed with every sense alert. They remind us that true wisdom was never meant to be easy. It was meant to change you in the reaching. Walk into any ancient tomb or temple, and your first impression is often one of muted earth tones, beiges, browns, the occasional faded red. But tilt your gaze upward, and you might catch glimpses of a far more vibrant past. Ceilings hold colors that time forgot, preserving hues so brilliant they seem impossible for their age. This isn't just luck, it's physics. While walls bear the brunt of sunlight, moisture, and human touch, ceilings exist in a sheltered world. Their angled surfaces deflect the most damaging ultraviolet rays, while their height keeps them beyond the reach of curious hands and abrasive breezes. The result, a time capsule of pigment, where chemistry and architecture conspire to defy decay. Take the famous Mayan murals at Bonampak. The walls once dazzled with scenes of royal processions and battles, but centuries of humidity and light exposure left them ghostly. Look up, though, and the ceiling tells a different story. Here, the blues retain their celestial depth, the greens their jungle richness. These surviving colors aren't just aesthetic accidents, they're scientific puzzles. Analysis reveals the Maya used rare mineral combinations like palygorskite clay mixed with indigo to create their famed Maya blue, a pigment so stable it resists even modern solvents. The ceilings preserved not just the art, but the recipe for a color science hadn't seen before. But the true revelation lies in what these pigments reveal about ancient globalization. The cinnabar reds in Roman ceilings traced back to Spanish mines, while the lapis lazuli blues in Tibetan temple vaults originated in Afghan quarries, proof of trade networks spanning continents. At Egypt's Temple of Hathor, restorers found traces of a vibrant green pigment made from malachite mixed with Nile silt, a local innovation that later influenced Mediterranean palettes. These ceilings became accidental ledgers, recording economic and cultural exchanges invisible in other artifacts. Some colors survived by sheer obscurity. In the catacombs of Rome, certain ceiling frescoes retain their original pinks and yellows because they were painted in sections rarely illuminated by oil lamps. The darkness that hid them from medieval pilgrims also protected them from oxidative decay. Similarly, the gold leaf in Byzantine church domes often outlasted wall mosaics simply because soot from candles accumulated more slowly overhead, forming an unintended protective layer. Modern technology lets us reconstruct these lost palettes in startling detail. Multispectral imaging of a 12th century Sicilian church ceiling recently revealed a now invisible constellation map painted with orpiment, a toxic arsenic-based yellow that darkened to black over time. In China's Mogao caves, ultraviolet fluorescence exposed lavish celestial scenes on ceilings once thought to be plain plaster. Their organic dyes invisible to the naked eye but still fluorescing after 1,000 years. What makes these chromatic time capsules so precious is their defiance of expectation. We think of the past in sepia tones, but ceilings remind us that antiquity was riotously colorful. That muted statue in the museum, it likely once wore garish hues. Those classical white marble ruins, they were probably painted like carnival floats. The ceilings preserve the truth. History wasn't beige. It was bold, experimental, even gaudy. And thanks to these sheltered surfaces, we can still catch fleeting glimpses of the vivid world our ancestors actually inhabited. When castle walls trembled under siege engines and gates groaned against battering rams, survival often depended on looking up, high above the chaos of battle. Concealed within vaulted ceilings and behind decorative corbels, ran a network of escape routes known only to a privileged few. Stirling Castle's royal chambers hold one of the most ingenious examples, a narrow passage disguised as part of the ceiling's timber framework, accessible only by removing what appeared to be a fixed decorative panel. This wasn't just a hidden door, it was a psychological masterstroke. While invaders focused on breaching walls or tunneling underground, architects had engineered salvation overhead. The engineering behind these vertical escapes reveals a sophistication rarely credited to medieval builders. At Château de Coucy in France, a false ceiling in the Great Hall concealed a shaft leading directly to the outer ramparts, a route that could be collapsed behind fleeing nobility with a single pulled lever. The real brilliance lay in the details. These passages were never straight. Curved or zigzagging paths prevented siege weapons from being angled upward to blast through them, while sound-dampening layers of straw and fabric ensured whispers wouldn't echo to rooms below. Some, like the escape route in Wales' Raglan Castle, incorporated small ledges at intervals, allowing defenders to drop caltrops or boiling oil onto pursuers climbing after them. But why prioritize ceilings over traditional underground tunnels? The answer lies in medieval siege tactics. Attackers expected subterranean countermoves and often flooded or smoked out basements. Ceiling routes, however, exploited a blind spot literally. The glare from torches and sunlight made upward gaps hard to spot from ground level, while the sheer physical strain of holding a torch aloft for prolonged inspection meant most searches remained eye level. At Crac des Chevaliers, the Crusader fortress in Syria, a ceiling escape disguised as a structural beam only became visible when viewed from a specific corner of the room at dawn, when angled light revealed its seams. Some of these hidden pathways served more than just escape. The ceiling of the Doge's Palace in Venice concealed listening tubes that channeled conversations from chambers below to hidden observers, an early surveillance system. In Japan's Heimji Castle, ceiling panels above audience halls could be removed to rain arrows down on betrayers during tense negotiations. The most chilling might be Bohemia's Český Krumlov Castle, where a decorative ceiling rose to reveal hidden archers when a concealed counterweight was triggered, turning diplomatic meetings into death traps. What's remarkable is how consistently this vertical thinking appears across cultures. From the sliding ceiling stones of India's Gwalior fort to the retractable rope ladders hidden in Ottoman palace muqarnas, civilizations separated by centuries and continents all arrived at the same conclusion. When danger comes knocking, the path to safety rarely lies at eye level. These architectural secrets remind us that survival often depends on seeing the world differently, literally looking beyond the obvious to where the walls meet the sky. Among the magnolia blossoms and gilded cherubs adorning antebellum plantation ceilings, a quiet revolution unfolded in plain sight. Enslaved artisans, forced to decorate the homes of those who oppressed them, found ingenious ways to weave their heritage into the very fabric of these opulent spaces. In the intricate border of a Louisiana dining room ceiling, careful observers might spot the Sankofa bird, a West African symbol meaning return and fetch it, tucked between European floral patterns. Elsewhere, geometric quilting motifs familiar to the Carolina lowcountry snake through neoclassical plasterwork, their sharp angles and repeating diamonds carrying secret meanings about escape routes and safe houses. These weren't accidents or aesthetic whims, they were acts of cultural preservation, hidden where arrogance ensured they'd be ignored. The psychology behind this covert resistance reveals its brilliance. Plantation owners demanded grand ceilings as symbols of their sophistication, yet rarely inspected the details they considered mere ornamentation. This created the perfect blind spot. In Virginia's Shirley Plantation, the ceiling of the so-called slave chapel hides constellations arranged not as they appear in the Virginia sky, but mirrored to match the view from Ghana's coast, a celestial map for souls yearning for home. Similarly, the coiled basket patterns pressed into Georgia ceiling medallions correspond to Congolese spiritual symbols representing protection and ancestral connection. By embedding these elements within approved European designs, enslaved craftsmen turned ceilings into clandestine classrooms, teaching forbidden knowledge under the oppressor's nose. Some of the most powerful messages weren't visual at all. At Tennessee's Belle Meade Plantation, historians recently discovered that certain ceiling roses, those decorative plaster centerpieces, were intentionally hollowed to amplify and distort sound. When positioned above slaveholders' beds, they would catch whispered conversations and carry them through servant passages. This acoustic trick transformed what owners saw as mere status symbols into early warning systems, giving the enslaved community precious minutes to hide forbidden literacy lessons or spiritual gatherings before inspections. What makes these acts of defiance so extraordinary is their layered audience. While plantation owners saw only pretty decorations, fellow enslaved individuals recognized the hidden maps, warnings, and prayers. The ceiling became a visual language of survival, where a curling vine might indicate a sympathetic household, or a broken pattern could signal increased patrols. Even the materials held meaning. Traces of indigo pigment found in South Carolina ceiling borders match West African spiritual dyes, suggesting some artisans smuggled sacred substances into their work. Perhaps most poignant are the ceilings that became accidental time capsules. In Alabama's Forks of Cypress plantation, restorers found fingerprints pressed into the back of ceiling panels, deliberate marks left by craftsmen who knew their names would never be recorded in ledgers. Elsewhere, carbon dating revealed that certain ceiling beams were repurposed from slave ships' timbers, their curved shapes betraying origins as whole planks. These silent witnesses remind us that resistance took many forms, sometimes simply by ensuring that the hands that built these grand spaces couldn't be entirely erased. These ceilings challenge our assumptions about power and memory. While history books often portray slavery as a system of total control, these hidden symbols prove the oppressed found ways to speak, to teach, and to remember. They turned the master's prized decorations into living archives, ensuring that even in chains, their culture couldn't be fully destroyed, the ultimate irony. The very arrogance that dismissed these details as just craftsmanship allowed them to survive, carrying messages across centuries to those who finally thought to look up. In the shadowed recesses of Chichen Itza's Temple of Kukulkan, something extraordinary happens when you clap your hands. The sound doesn't just echo, it transforms, rippling upward in a series of chirps that eerily mimic the call of the sacred Quetzal bird. This isn't an accident of acoustics, it's a meticulously engineered phenomenon, achieved through the temple's stepped ceiling design. Each terrace acts like a sound filter, slicing the initial noise into staggered frequencies that recreate the bird's cry as they travel toward the heavens. The Maya didn't just build structures to be seen, they crafted them to be heard, turning stone into a conduit between the human and the divine. This fusion of architecture and sound wasn't unique to Mesoamerica. Halfway across the world, beneath the dome of Gol Gumbaz in India, a whisper circles the perimeter 7 times before fading, a trick achieved by the ceiling's perfect spherical curvature. Built in the 17th century, this architectural marvel demonstrates how Islamic engineers manipulated space to create auditory miracles. The effect wasn't merely for amusement. It symbolized the Islamic concept of divine omniscience, where even the softest utterance could never truly disappear. Europe's Gothic cathedrals took a different approach. The vaulted ceilings of places like St. Paul's Whispering Gallery don't just carry sound, they purify it. Stand at one end and murmur a phrase, and the curved stone overhead strips away all but the clearest frequencies, delivering your words with uncanny precision to someone 30 meters away. Medieval builders achieved this by embedding hollow pottery jars into the ceiling structure, acting as natural resonators that amplified specific vocal tones while dampening ambient noise. These weren't decorative choices, they were theological statements. In an era where the spoken word carried spiritual power, these ceilings ensured sacred texts would be heard exactly as intended, untouched by the distortions of distance or doubt. Perhaps the most haunting soundscape survives in Turkey's underground cities. The ceilings of Derinkuyu's tunnels feature precisely angled grooves that transform dripping water into rhythmic patterns, some matching the cadence of Sufi meditation chants, others mimicking the march of approaching armies. Recent studies suggest these acoustic signatures serve dual purposes, guiding initiates through pitch-black rituals, while warning inhabitants of intruders by amplifying distant footsteps into recognizable rhythms. What unites these sonic ceilings is their understanding of sound as architecture's invisible twin. Where walls define space visually, ceilings shape how we experience it through vibration and resonance. They remind us that ancient builders thought in dimensions beyond the physical crafting spaces that didn't just house rituals, but actively participated in them. The next time you find yourself beneath an ancient vault, try closing your eyes. The stones above might still be speaking if you've learned how to listen. High above the flickering candles of Europe's medieval crypts, names whisper across time, not carved into headstones, but etched into the very ceilings where shadows dance. These soaring stone surfaces served as more than architectural marvels. They became the ultimate family records, preserving lineages in a space protected from both the elements and prying eyes. At Saint Denis Basilica near Paris, the vaults bear hundreds of names arranged like constellations, each marking a royal burial site in precise relation to others, creating a three-dimensional genealogy chart in stone. Unlike the heroic statues lining the walls below, these ceiling inscriptions tell a quieter truth. Bloodlines matter more than individual glory when confronting eternity. The logic behind this vertical record-keeping reveals a profound understanding of preservation. While walls could be whitewashed or repurposed common during political upheavals, ceilings remained untouched by the tides of change. In Spain's León Cathedral, restorers recently uncovered layers of gilt hiding 12th century burial notations, perfectly preserved beneath later decorative additions. The artisans who applied the gold leaf had carefully worked around the genealogical markings, respecting their sacred purpose even as fashions shifted below. This practice created accidental time capsules. At Canterbury Cathedral, ceiling records helped identify misplaced royal remains during the Reformation when tomb desecration left ground-level markers unreliable. Chinese ancestral halls perfected this concept into an art form. Walk into a Ming Dynasty clan temple, and your gaze is drawn upward to lacquered panels where family trees unfold like unfolding scrolls. Each generation branches across the ceiling beams, with crimson threads connecting marriages and gold leaf highlighting scholarly achievements. The height wasn't just symbolic, it ensured records survived floods and fires that regularly destroyed paper genealogies. In Fujian province, one Chen family hall's ceiling survived a 17th century rebellion intact, allowing descendants to reconstruct their lineage after written records were burned. Some of the most poignant examples come from unexpected places. Beneath Venice's bustling streets, the Armenian crypt of San Lazzaro degli Armeni shelters a ceiling map of the diaspora names arranged by ancestral villages in historic Armenia, with gilded lines tracing migration routes to Italy. Similarly, the wooden ceiling of a small synagogue in Prague became a sacred census, recording not just names but the professions of a community decimated by pogroms. These weren't mere memorials, they were acts of defiance, ensuring no life would be fully erased by violence or time. The true genius of these ceiling archives lies in their dual nature: public yet intimate, visible yet overlooked. Unlike wall inscriptions meant for immediate reading, ceiling records required intentional engagement. To consult them, you had to pause, tilt your head back, and commit to the search. In doing so, you mirrored the very act of remembrance itself, looking beyond the present moment to connect with what came before. That's why these elevated genealogies endure when other records fade. They demand more than passive observation. They ask us to participate in the keeping of memory. The plaster above your head might seem like mere background until you realize it's holding fragments of ancient globalization. In the grand temples of Thebes, restorers scraping away at ceiling cracks made an unexpected discovery. The smooth white plaster wasn't local. Chemical analysis revealed gypsum from the distant turquoise mountains of the Sinai, a staggering 300-kilometer journey across deserts. This wasn't just a decorative choice, it was evidence of a Bronze Age supply chain, where materials traveled farther than most people ever would in their lifetimes. What makes these overhead trade records so revealing is their sheer durability. While pottery shards and textiles decompose, ceiling plaster fossilizes economic relationships. Take the lapis lazuli flecks found in a modest Florentine chapel's vaults. This vibrant blue mineral could only come from Afghanistan's remote Kokcha Valley, passing through Venetian merchants and Medici bank transfers before being ground into pigment by anonymous apprentices. The walls might show wealthy patrons, but the ceiling preserves the true scope of their reach, stretching all the way to the Hindu Kush Mountains. Even more telling are the failures preserved overhead. In Cyprus' ancient city of Kourion, archaeologists found a collapsed ceiling with 3 distinct plaster layers: local limestone, imported Egyptian gypsum, and a strange red clay from Anatolia. This wasn't just a repair history, it was a geopolitical snapshot. The Egyptian layer coincided with Ptolemaic rule, the Anatolian with Roman annexation, each occupying power, bringing familiar materials from homelands now visible like tree rings in plaster. Some ceilings became literal cargo manifests. The wooden beams of Kyoto's Golden Pavilion bear faint merchant seals burned into their underside, invisible from the floor but perfectly preserved in the dry upper air. These stamps correspond to timber floated down river from the Japan seacoast, revealing 14th century logging networks. Similarly, traces of Baltic amber dust were found mixed into the ceiling mortar of Novgorod's St. Sophia Cathedral, evidence of Hanseatic League trade routes frozen in time overhead. Perhaps the most poignant trade records are the unintended ones. In Mexico's Templo Mayor, the ceiling plaster contains microscopic phytoplankton fossils, organisms that only thrive in the Gulf of California. These tiny time travelers got mixed into the plaster when builders used beach sand from Pacific trading partners, unknowingly embedding marine ecology into sacred architecture. Today, they tell us more about Aztec maritime connections than any surviving ledger. These material whispers remind us that ceilings didn't just reflect wealth, they documented its flow. Every brushstroke of imported pigment, every scoop of foreign plaster was a financial decision, a cultural exchange, sometimes even a diplomatic statement. The next time you admire an ancient ceiling, remember, you're not just looking at art, you're reading the first draft of globalization, written in the universal language of stone and mortar. There's a hidden rhythm to ancient ceilings, one that beats in time with the cosmos itself. Step into Rome's Pantheon at high noon on the spring equinox, and watch as a blade of sunlight pierces the oculus, striking a precisely marked point on the interior wall. This isn't just dramatic lighting, it's a centuries-old clock engineered to track the seasons with unerring accuracy. The dome's curvature acts like the gnomon of a sundial, its opening calibrated so the sun's path paints an invisible calendar across the marble floor. But here's what's truly astonishing. This celestial clock wasn't unique. From the jungles of Mesoamerica to the deserts of Egypt, civilizations turned their ceilings into silent timekeepers, encoding astronomical knowledge into architecture. The Maya took this concept even further. At Chichen Itza's El Caracol Observatory, narrow slits in the ceiling align with Venus's extreme positions in the sky, a planet they tracked with obsessive precision for both agricultural and ritual purposes. But the real stroke of genius lies in the Pyramid of Kukulkan, where the stepped ceiling design casts triangular shadows during equinoxes, creating the illusion of a feathered serpent slithering down the stairs. This wasn't just art imitating nature, it was a functional almanac marking planting seasons and religious festivals with theatrical precision. The shadows moved like clock hands across stone, turning the entire structure into a dynamic calendar. Ancient Egypt's temple ceilings reveal a different kind of timekeeping. At Dendera, the famous zodiac ceiling isn't just a star map, it's a complex equation of celestial mechanics. Certain constellations appear in positions that only match the sky during specific dynasties, suggesting the ceiling was periodically updated like a living document. Even more remarkable are the star clocks found in tomb ceilings, where diagonal rows of hieroglyphs track the nightly movement of decaan stars to mark hours between sunset and dawn. These weren't passive decorations, they were tools for priests to time nocturnal rituals to the minute. Northern Europe's passage tombs demonstrate how universal this practice was. Newgrange's corbelled ceiling features a small roof box that floods the inner chamber with sunlight on winter solstice, a phenomenon lasting just 17 minutes at dawn. The precision required to achieve this 5,000 years ago without metal tools staggers modern engineers. Similar light calendars appear in Scotland's Michaud and Spain's Antiquara dolmens, proving that Neolithic cultures shared this celestial obsession across continents. Why hide such sophisticated technology overhead? Because ceilings offered stability, while sundials on walls or ground required recalibration as buildings settled or landscapes changed. Ceiling-mounted celestial markers remained true for generations. The Pantheon's oculus will keep time as long as the dome stands, indifferent to the bustling city below. These ancient architects understood something we often forget. Real timekeeping isn't about counting hours, it's about synchronizing human lives with the grand, unchanging cycles of the universe. And they left that wisdom where we'd least expect to find it, hovering just above our heads. High above the stone vaults of medieval cathedrals, rust stains on ancient iron hooks tell a silent story, one of lavish textiles that once billowed overhead like captured clouds. These forgotten fabric ceilings transformed sacred spaces for fleeting moments, their vibrant silks and embroidered linens leaving behind only ghostly traces in the architecture. At Chartres Cathedral, careful observers can spot worn grooves along the ribs of the nave, precisely spaced to support rods that held tapestries during high feast days. The walls may show saints and martyrs in eternal glory, but these hooks whisper of celebrations that came and went, of spaces reinvented for special occasions with fabrics now lost to time. The absence of these textiles speaks volumes. Unlike permanent frescoes or carvings, fabric canopies were designed to be temporarily changed with the liturgical calendar, royal visits, or seasonal festivals. In Venice's Doge's Palace, infrared scans revealed painted imitations of drapery on the ceiling, a permanent homage to the lavish silks that once hung there during state ceremonies. This artistic sleight of hand proves how integral these textiles were to the space's identity, even as the originals disintegrated. Similar painted fabric illusions appear in ancient Egyptian tomb ceilings, where artists meticulously recreated the pleats and folds of linen canopies that shielded royalty in the afterlife, a poignant attempt to make temporary protection eternal. Some of the most tantalizing clues come from unexpected places. Beneath layers of grime in Spain's Alhambra, conservators found tiny threads of gold and crimson silk wedged into ceiling mucanas, likely remnants of wedding decorations from the 14th century. In Kyoto's Nijo Castle, grooves in the ceiling beams align with historical accounts of enormous indigo-dyed cloths unfurled during imperial audiences, their patterns signaling the rank of visitors permitted beneath them. These weren't just decorations, they were social filters using height and fabric to enforce hierarchies. The higher the textile, the more exalted the space beneath it, a language of status written in silk and air. What makes these vanished textiles so fascinating is their democratic impermanence. While stone carvings celebrated rulers and religions, fabric ceilings often reflected everyday life. English parish church records mention linen, heaven cloths painted with stars, hung for harvest festivals using hooks still visible in the rafters. In Persia, travelers described ceilings draped with rose-scented muslin during summer months, a practical luxury that left no trace beyond fragrant memories in poetry. These ephemeral transformations remind us that history wasn't just carved in stone. It was woven, hung, and taken down, as fluid as the societies that created them. Modern technology is finally giving voice to these silent witnesses. Spectral imaging of the Sistine Chapel's ceiling detected organic residues suggesting Michelangelo worked beneath temporary fabric canopies to control plaster drying, a detail lost for centuries. At Istanbul's Hagia Sophia, laser scans mapped hundreds of ceiling anchor points invisible to the naked eye, revealing a rotating system of seasonal hangings described in Byzantine texts but long dismissed as myth. Each discovery peels back another layer, proving that the most intimate stories of the past often dangled by a thread quite literally, just above our heads. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson of these textile ghosts. They challenge our obsession with permanence, reminding us that some of history's most vibrant moments were never meant to last. The hooks and grooves remain as humble invitations to imagine. What grandeur once floated there, coloring the light, muffling echoes, transforming cold stone into something alive? The answer lies not in what survived, but in the empty spaces where fabric once breathed with the seasons, leaving only its shadow on the stones below. Beneath the delicate stucco lacework of the Alhambra's ceilings lies a hydraulic symphony, one composed not in notes but in droplets. Those intricate arabesques aren't merely decorative, they're part of an ingenious water distribution system where every curve and recess serves a dual purpose. Tiny channels carved into the plaster catch condensation from Granada's humid nights, funneling it silently through hidden passages to underground cisterns. During rainstorms, the ceilings transform into musical instruments, with water cascading down specially angled grooves to create rhythmic patterns against bronze plates, a liquid carillon that announced storms long before thunder reached human ears. This wasn't just engineering, it was poetry in motion, where form and function danced as gracefully as the water itself. The genius of these concealed water systems reveals itself in their subtlety. Unlike Roman aqueducts that proclaimed their might through towering arches, the Alhambra's hydraulics whispered. In the hall of the Abencerrage, the ceiling's star-shaped mucanas disguise narrow flutes that redistribute humidity, preventing damage to delicate gold leaf while maintaining perfect acoustics. Meanwhile, the Comer's Tower's domed ceiling features nearly invisible capillary channels that draw moisture upward like tree roots in reverse, allowing evaporation to cool the chamber naturally. These weren't just solutions, they were conversations with physics conducted in the language of geometry and gravity. Halfway across the world, another water secret hides in plain sight. The ceilings of Cambodia's Angkor Wat temples incorporate shallow troughs along their sandstone ribs, designed to break monsoon rains into controlled sheets that wash away dust without eroding carvings. Recent laser scans revealed these channels align with carvings of the serpent Vasuki, turning the entire temple into a cosmological water clock during the rainy season. Similarly, in the cliff dwellings of Mesa Verde, ancestral pueblones carved microscopic grooves into ceiling rocks to direct condensation into collection basins, a life-saving innovation in their arid environment. What unites these hidden water systems is their defiance of expectations. Where modern engineering shouts, these ancient solutions sing. The Romans may have mastered the spectacle of water with their gushing fountains, but the Nasrids of Alhambra composed etudes in efficiency, where every drop found purpose. In Persia's windcatcher towers, ceiling channels merged cool air with moisture to create natural air conditioning, while in Japan's Byodo in Phoenix Hall, copper-lined ceiling edges minimized ice damage through thermal conductivity centuries before the concept entered engineering textbooks. Perhaps the most astonishing rediscovery came in 2012, when restorers at Turkey's Topkapi Palace noticed peculiar stains on a domed ceiling. Further investigation revealed an unknown system of ceramic pipes woven into the structure, designed to harvest fog by mimicking the water-collecting hairs of desert beetles. This biomimicry, lost for 500 years, outperforms modern mesh nets in efficiency. Similar breakthroughs followed in Malta's Haga Kim temples, where ceiling stones were found to contain magnesium deposits that naturally purify collected rainwater, a Neolithic predecessor to today's filtration systems. These ceiling-borne water solutions challenge our assumptions about ancient technology. They prove innovation wasn't always about scale or visibility, but about observing nature's quiet genius and embedding it into the spaces where people lived and worshipped. The next time you hear rain patter against a roof, consider what secrets might lie between the drops, and how civilizations before us turned that simple sound into both survival and art. Some of history's most ingenious hiding places weren't underground, they were right overhead, masquerading as ordinary ceilings. Step into the ruins of a Maya temple, and you might notice something peculiar about the vaulted stone above you. What appears to be solid masonry is often a carefully constructed illusion, a false ceiling concealing an entire hidden floor where priests once lived and worked in secrecy. These elevated chambers weren't just architectural quirks, they were strategic strongholds, placing the most sacred spaces literally above the public's line of sight. While worshippers moved through the open halls below, unaware, the true heartbeat of the temple pulsed quietly above their heads. The logic behind these overhead hideaways reveals a universal truth about power and perception. Medieval castle builders perfected this trick with solar chambers, private rooms tucked between the great hall's ceiling and the roof, accessible only by disguised staircases or retractable ladders. At England's Rochester Castle, the solar concealed behind its painted wooden ceiling wasn't just a noble's retreat. It housed the castle's treasury, with floorboards specifically weakened to collapse under any thief's weight. Similarly, Venetian merchants designed palazzo ceilings with hollow compartments for ledgers and contracts, knowing that burglars would tunnel through walls long before thinking to dismantle an ornate fresco overhead. What made these vertical vaults so effective was their psychological advantage. In Maya cities like Tikal, the priestly quarters above temples weren't merely hidden, they were acoustically designed to amplify whispers into the sanctums below, allowing unseen observers to monitor rituals. Meanwhile, in Japan's Heimji Castle, the ceiling above the Lord's audience chamber concealed not just storage but an entire company of samurai who could drop through removable panels at the first sign of betrayal. The very act of looking upward became a test of loyalty. Servants who glanced too often at the ceiling during meetings might find themselves under suspicion. Some of these overhead chambers served darker purposes. The Vatican's infamous Room of Tears sits directly above the Sistine Chapel, where newly elected popes were once escorted to privately collapse under the weight of their new office, a ritual hidden from the cardinals below. In Istanbul's Topkapi Palace, harem ceilings concealed listening posts where eunuchs tracked conversations through strategically placed grills, their reports flowing upward to the sultan like smoke through hidden chimneys. The real stroke of genius was how these spaces exploited human habit. We're conditioned to watch for doors in walls, trapdoors in floors, but a ceiling that's also a floor. That requires a cognitive leap few make instinctively. The builders of Malta's hypogeum took this further, carving entire sacrificial chambers into the ceiling rock, their entrances disguised as natural fissures. Similarly, Rajasthan's Amber Fort hides a mirrored ceiling that conceals an escape tunnel, its reflective surface designed to dazzle invaders into overlooking the seams. What's remarkable is how consistently this vertical secrecy appears across cultures, from the grain silos suspended over Egyptian granaries to the sky vaults of Tibetan monasteries where sacred texts were stored beyond the reach of floods and rodents. Civilizations kept returning to the same solution. If you want to protect something, place it where people forget to look. The ultimate security system wasn't a lock or a guard. It was the simple, unshakable human tendency to take ceilings at face value. Walk into an ancient Japanese temple during evening prayers, and you wouldn't just see the flicker of candlelight, you'd breathe in an invisible masterpiece. The cedar planks overhead weren't merely structural, they were slow-release fragrance chambers, warming under the heat of countless flames to perfume the sacred space with earthy, calming notes. This wasn't incidental aromatherapy, it was deliberate sensory engineering, turning ceilings into olfactory instruments that played scented harmonies no wall could replicate. While frescoes and carvings captivated the eyes, these wooden canopies spoke directly to the limbic system, weaving tranquility into the very air worshippers inhaled. The science behind these aromatic ceilings reveals their brilliance. Cedar and cypress woods contain natural compounds called phytoncides, antimicrobial oils that release steadily when heated. In Japan's Toshodai-ji temple, artisans selected planks with specific grain densities to control scent diffusion, placing tighter-grained wood near heat sources for gradual release during long ceremonies. Similarly, the sandalwood ceilings of Kerala's Padmanabhaswamy temple were deliberately unfinished, allowing the wood's pores to breathe and intensify fragrance when tropical humidity rose. These weren't passive materials, they were living scent libraries curated to shift with the seasons and rituals. Some ceilings became veritable apothecaries. Beneath the gold leaf of Venice's Basilica dei Frari, restorers found tiny cloth pouches of lavender and myrrh sewn into the wooden substructure, a medieval answer to air fresheners. In Persia's Ali Kapı Palace, the famous music room, ceiling concealed compartments of rose petals and saffron that would release their perfume when sun-heated tiles warmed the hidden chambers above. Even more ingenious were the wax-impregnated beams in certain Byzantine churches, where beeswax mixed with frankincense would melt just enough during candlelit vigils to scent the space without dripping. What made these fragrance traps so effective was their invisibility. Unlike incense burners that demanded attention, scented ceilings worked subliminally. The cedar ceilings of Kyoto's Nishi Honganji, for instance, emitted stress-reducing hinoki oil at concentrations too subtle to notice consciously, yet enough to lower worshippers' cortisol levels, a phenomenon now confirmed by modern studies. Similarly, the juniper beams in Tibetan monasteries' meditation halls released aromas shown to enhance gamma brainwave activity, perfect for deepening contemplative states. Perhaps the most poignant examples are the lost scents we can only reconstruct through chemistry. Gas chromatography of resin deposits on Egyptian temple ceilings revealed a long-forgotten blend of pistachio, mastic, and terebinth, a sacred perfume designed to mimic the sweat of the gods described in hieroglyphs. In Rome's Temple of Venus, microscopic analysis of ceiling mortar uncovered traces of crushed rose petals mixed into the plaster, creating a permanent floral haze during summer festivals. These weren't decorations, they were immersive experiences, wrapping visitors in olfactory narratives that shaped memory and emotion long after they departed. The true genius of these fragrant ceilings lies in their ephemeral nature. Unlike pigments in frescoes or carvings in stone, their most powerful effects left no physical trace, only fleeting sensory impressions woven into the fabric of ritual and daily life. They challenge our modern obsession with permanence, reminding us that some of history's most profound innovations weren't meant to last, but to be felt in passing moments, carried on the breath of centuries. Hidden beneath layers of plaster and tucked into the darkest corners of ceiling beams, generations of builders left behind more than just structural support. They embedded silent guardians. Across ancient Rome, terracotta phalluses were deliberately sealed into the vaults of homes and shops, not as vulgar ornaments but as powerful amulets believed to deflect the evil eye and invite prosperity. These weren't hidden out of shame, their concealment was the point. By placing them overhead, just out of sight but ever present, they transformed the ceiling into a spiritual shield, a boundary between the vulnerable world below and the malevolent forces they feared might descend from above. The practice wasn't limited to bawdy Roman symbolism. In China's Ming dynasty, craftsmen slipped delicate paper talismans into the hollows of roof beams, each brushstroke inked with Taoist incantations to repel fire and misfortune. What's striking is how precisely these charms mirrored their surroundings. Just as the beams physically supported the roof, the hidden inscriptions were thought to uphold an invisible order, balancing cosmic energies through calligraphy and intention. Even the placement followed feng shui principles, with certain characters facing specific directions to amplify their power. Some of the most poignant protections were the simplest. Medieval European builders often sealed dried hawthorn sprigs into ceiling cavities, a folk charm against lightning, chosen because the plant was said to have formed Christ's crown of thorns. In Turkey, archaeologists found blue glass nazar beads cemented into Ottoman mosque domes, their unblinking cobalt pupils watching for envy and ill will. Perhaps most touching are the tiny handprints pressed into the clay ceilings of Anatolian homes, left by children whose families believed their innocence could purify the space. What unites these hidden safeguards is their quiet defiance. Unlike grand altars or temple statues meant for public veneration, ceiling charms were intimate, almost secretive, a whispered pact between the builders and the divine. Their power came not from display but from faithful concealment, like a mother tucking a protective note into her child's pocket. The next time you glance at an old ceiling, remember, the true architecture isn't always in what you see, but in what was carefully, lovingly stashed just beyond view, waiting centuries for someone to wonder why. Step into Sant'Ignazio's nave and prepare for visual vertigo. That celestial explosion above you isn't a dome. It's a flat surface transformed into a dizzying portal to heaven through sheer artistic deception. Baroque masters like Andrea Pozzo didn't just paint ceilings, they weaponized perspective, turning plaster and pigment into immersive theaters of the impossible. The secret lies in anamorphosis, the same trick that makes sidewalk chalk art pop in 3D, but scaled to architectural grandeur. Where walls constrain illusion with their vertical limits, ceilings offer an uninterrupted canvas for total sensory hijacking. What makes these perspective feats so breathtaking is their precision. Pozzo's Sant'Ignazio fresco calculates sight lines from a single marble disc embedded in the floor stand there, and the painted columns soar with perfect geometry. Step away and the entire composition warps like a funhouse mirror, revealing its artifice. This wasn't just artistic flair, it was mathematical theater. The ceiling becomes collaborator, demanding the viewer's participation to complete the illusion. Unlike passive wall art, these visions only resolve when you occupy the precise space the artist intended, making every observer both audience and co-conspirator. The technique traveled far beyond Rome. In Bavaria's Wieskirch, Johann Baptist Zimmermann painted a ceiling that seems to dissolve into open sky, complete with clouds drifting behind faux balustrades. The trick, he extended the church's real architectural elements into the painting, blurring the line where stone ended and brushstrokes began. Similarly, Venice's San Pantaleon boasts the largest canvas painting in the world, a ceiling that appears to burst upward into divine radiance, its figure's feet positioned exactly where the walls meet the vault to create seamless continuity. Some ceilings played even subtler games. The Kremlin's Archangel Cathedral features golden vines that spiral tighter as they ascend, exploiting peripheral vision to create a hypnotic sense of upward motion. In Mexico City's Metropolitan Cathedral, the gilt patterns on the central dome gradually compress toward the apex, fooling the eye into perceiving greater height than physically exists. These weren't mere decorations, they were psychological instruments, using the brain's own wiring against itself to inspire awe. The real stroke of genius was how these illusions served power and piety alike. A floating saint might stir devotion, while a seemingly endless palace ceiling could intimidate subjects with implied infinite authority. At Vienna's Liechtenstein Palace, the Hercules Hall ceiling extends the room into a painted Olympian realm, its forced perspective making the space feel doubly vast, a not-so-subtle reminder of the prince's aspirations. Even more audacious was Louis XIV's Hall of Mirrors at Versailles, where ceiling paintings combined with wall reflections to create a kaleidoscopic demonstration of absolute power stretching endlessly in all directions. Modern science confirms how brilliantly these artists hacked human perception. Eye-tracking studies show Baroque ceilings exploit our instinct to scan edges first before focusing centrally. The painted architecture guides our gaze along predetermined paths. Meanwhile, VR recreations prove these illusions lose all potency when viewed from any angle except the intended vantage point, revealing their meticulous engineering. Perhaps that's the ultimate lesson of these perspective marvels. True mastery isn't just about fooling the eye, but knowing exactly where the viewer will stand both physically and in their moment of wonder. Cracks spiderwebbing across a temple ceiling aren't just damage, they're diaries written in stone. Those jagged lines above the Parthenon's columns, they're a precise record of the earthquake that shook Athens in 373 BC, preserved because no one could reach high enough to plaster over them. While walls were endlessly patched and repainted, ceilings became accidental archives, capturing disasters too immense for human repair. The soot staining the vaults of York Minster tells a story walls never could traces of the 1489 fire that gutted the cathedral, preserved because cleaning crews couldn't scrub 30 meters overhead. These unintended timestamps reveal truths that written records often omit or distort, giving us unfiltered access to the moments that nearly toppled civilizations. The real magic lies in how these ceiling scars decode history's gaps. Take the Basilica of Maxentius in Rome, where the ceiling's fractured concrete reveals not one but 3 distinct layers of repair mortar, each mixed with different local sands that geologists can trace to specific quarries. This trifold patch job corresponds perfectly with historical accounts of earthquakes in 308, 442, and 1349, creating a verifiable timeline of disaster and recovery. Similarly, in Japan's Horyuji Temple, the ceiling beams bear charm marks that only align with a previously disputed fire mentioned in 8th century poetry, confirming the event was real, not metaphorical. Some of the most revealing repairs aren't even visible to the naked eye. In Istanbul's Hagia Sophia, ultraviolet light exposes ancient ceiling patches where Byzantine builders used crushed brick mortar after the 558 dome collapse, a formula later abandoned when quarries reopened, creating a chemical fingerprint of supply chain disruptions during plague years. At Cambodia's Angkor Wat, LiDAR scans revealed ceiling cracks filled with a unique resin-sand mixture only used during the reign of Jayavarman VII, proving which sections survived a devastating Cham invasion. These material clues often contradict official narratives. The so-called perfectly preserved coffered ceiling of Rome's Pantheon actually contains 16th-century repairs disguised with original-style stucco, exposing how even Renaissance curators faked historical continuity. Perhaps the most poignant repair marks are those left incomplete. The ceiling of Pompeii's Temple of Isis shows hasty patching where workers were filling earthquake damage when Vesuvius erupted, their buckets of wet plaster still positioned beneath the unfinished sections. In China's Longmen grottos, a Tang dynasty ceiling bears symmetrical drill marks for hanging repair scaffolds that were never removed when Buddhist persecution halted restoration. These frozen moments remind us that history isn't just written by triumphs, but by interruptions, the disasters that came too fast, the ambitions cut short, the repairs abandoned mid-stroke. Modern technology is turning these ceiling scars into Rosetta Stones for reconstruction. At Mexico's Teotihuacan, 3D modeling of ceiling cracks helped seismologists pinpoint the exact epicenter and magnitude of a 4th-century earthquake that likely triggered the city's decline. In Florence, spectral analysis of soot layers on the Duomo's ceiling revealed which medieval fires burned olive wood versus vine cuttings, allowing historians to match blazes to specific political upheavals when certain crops were destroyed. Even the humble nail holes where craftsmen hung repair platforms now provide data. Their patterns and corrosion levels help date multiple phases of damage at sites like Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. These unintended records challenge how we define historical evidence, where official chronicles might record a great tremor or the year of fires. Ceiling scars show us the diagonal fracture patterns of seismic waves, the direction of smoke inhalation, the desperation of quick fixes. They transform grand narratives into tactile realities, proof that civilizations didn't just rise and fall, but clung stubbornly to beauty even as the world cracked overhead. The next time you stand beneath an ancient ceiling, don't just admire the artistry. Look for the places where the story broke and was pieced back together. The grandest ceilings of Renaissance Florence weren't always what they seemed. Walk into the Palazzo Vecchio today, and you'll see permanent frescoes stretching overhead, but 500 years ago, those same vaults played host to a rotating gallery of temporary masterpieces. Painted canvases as large as sailing ships once billowed from the ceiling beams during festivals, their vibrant scenes of mythology and religion transforming civic spaces into immersive theaters. These weren't mere decorations, they were the blockbuster films of their day, spectacles designed to awe, educate, and unite entire cities in shared wonder. Yet, unlike their wall-mounted counterparts, almost none survive. Their legacy lingers only in the iron rings still embedded in palace ceilings, the ghostly outlines of where ropes once strained under the weight of forgotten beauty. What makes these vanished canvases so tantalizing is their paradoxical nature. Created by some of history's greatest artists, Leonardo, Botticelli, Verrocchio, they were simultaneously celebrated and disposable. Accounts from Medici weddings describe entire mythological worlds suspended overhead. Jason's Argonauts seeming to sail across the vaults of the Palazzo Medici, or Persephone's abduction unfolding on linen so thin it fluttered with the breath of the crowd below. The very impermanence was the point. Like sand mandalas or ice sculptures, their fleeting existence heightened their impact, making each viewing a once-in-a-lifetime event. The clues to reconstructing this lost art form come from unexpected places. In Venice's Doge's Palace, restorers found tiny flakes of azurite and vermilion trapped in ceiling crevices, pigments that match no surviving wall art but correspond perfectly with descriptions of a temporary Ascension Day tableau. Similarly, the wooden beams of Siena's town hall bear grooves cut at precise intervals, revealing where massive canvas rolls were unfurled during the annual Palio celebrations. Even preparatory sketches survive in unlikely forms. The ceiling of Florence's Santissima Annunziata hides rough charcoal underdrawings that match abandoned compositions in Vasari's notebooks, suggesting artists tested designs directly overhead before committing them to canvas. Perhaps the most poignant remnants are the financial records. Payroll ledgers from Ferrara's Est Court list payments for sky nails and cloud ropes, while an inventory from Mantua's Gonzaga Palace details how temporary ceiling paintings were stored rolled in lavender-scented linen to repel moths, then tucked into specially constructed attic racks. These mundane details hint at an entire ecosystem of ephemeral art, with specialized craftsmen who understood how to make pigments glow by candlelight or calculate the exact tension needed to keep a 200-pound canvas flat against the pull of gravity. The real tragedy is how much we've lost to changing tastes. When permanent frescoes became fashionable in the late Renaissance, nobles whitewashed over the attachment points where festive canvases once hung, literally erasing the physical evidence of this vibrant tradition. Only in a few places, like the ceiling of Urbino's Studiolo, do we find deliberate preservations, small painted panels mimicking the look of draped canvases, frozen in perpetuity like a museum display of something meant to be transient. Modern technology is beginning to resurrect these ghostly masterpieces. Multispectral imaging of the Sistine Chapel's ceiling revealed traces of adhesive where tapestries may have once hung during special ceremonies, while 3D modeling of Versailles' attic beams has allowed historians to recreate the pulley systems that lowered enormous painted skies over Louis XIV's banquets. Each discovery peels back another layer, reminding us that history's most dazzling moments were often those never meant to last, their beauty burning brightest precisely because it was borrowed from time. What endures is the radical idea these temporary ceilings embodied, that art need not be eternal to be profound. In an age where we obsess over preservation, their willingness to create masterpieces knowing they'd fade invites us to reconsider our relationship with the ephemeral. The next time you gaze at a Renaissance ceiling, remember the greatest show might not be what's painted there now, but what once floated just beneath the beams, alive with color for one perfect night before vanishing like a dream at dawn. Beneath the shimmering marble floors and gilded walls of Mughal palaces, an invisible symphony of comfort played out overhead. The famous double ceilings of Fatehpur Sikri weren't just architectural flourishes, they were precision climate systems engineered centuries before modern HVAC. Hot summer air would enter through discrete vents near the roof, then cascade down the cavity between the two ceiling layers, cooling as it passed over water-soaked grass mats before emerging as refreshing breezes through intricately carved stone screens. This wasn't just passive ventilation, it was thermodynamics in action, using convection currents and evaporative cooling to transform sweltering afternoons into pleasant retreats. The real stroke of genius, the system required no energy beyond the initial design, just an intimate understanding of how air moves when heat and humidity dance. Roman engineers approached temperature control from the opposite direction literally. While we often picture hypocaust systems heating floors, the most sophisticated installations pumped warmth from above. At Britain's Fishbourne Roman Palace, archaeologists found hollow ceiling tiles connected to underground furnaces, creating radiant heat that cascaded downward like invisible sunlight. The secret lay in the stacking effect. Hot air rising through wall channels would pool against the ceiling first, then gradually descend as it cooled, maintaining perfect equilibrium. Workers even adjusted individual room temperatures by opening or closing ceramic dampers in the ceiling vaults, an ancient precursor to modern zoning systems. What's astonishing is how these technologies adapted to local materials. In Yemen's mud brick tower houses, ceilings incorporated alternating layers of straw and clay that expanded and contracted with temperature shifts, creating natural air circulation through microscopic gaps. Meanwhile, Japanese aristocrats slept beneath ceilings lined with charcoal-infused plaster that absorbed excess humidity during rainy seasons, then released it slowly during dry winters, a self-regulating system disguised as elegant craftsmanship. The Venetian approach took concealment further. The Doge's palace ceilings hide narrow seawater channels between their wooden beams. During scorching summers, servants would pour buckets of chilled Adriatic water into these hidden troughs, turning the entire ceiling into a massive heat sink. The evaporating seawater created a localized cooling effect, while the dense timber absorbed and slowly released the temperature differential, maintaining comfort long after the water evaporated. Modern science confirms the sophistication behind these ancient systems. Thermal imaging in Granada's Alhambra reveals how the Muqarna's ceiling shapes airflow, creating micro-vortices that distribute coolness evenly without draft. Similarly, analysis of Mayan corbelled vaults shows their steep angles weren't just structural. They accelerated nighttime heat radiation into the stars while trapping cooler air below. These weren't accidental efficiencies, they were calculated solutions to environmental challenges, encoded in geometry and material choices. Perhaps the most ingenious climate control hides in plain sight at Turkey's Ephesus terrace houses. Their ceilings contain embedded amphorae, not as structural elements but as thermal buffers. The air trapped in the curved clay pots created insulation layers that slowed heat transfer dramatically, keeping interiors up to 20 degrees cooler than the stone walls outside. The same principle appears in Tunisian desert homes, where painted sheepskins stretched across ceilings absorbed daytime heat, then released it during chilly nights, a perfect example of how ancient builders thought in cycles rather than fixed conditions. What unites these diverse systems is their silent elegance. Unlike today's humming air conditioners and clanking radiators, ancient climate control blended seamlessly into its surroundings, using physics as its engine and architecture as its medium. The next time you adjust your thermostat, consider the lost wisdom hovering just above eye level, where entire civilizations once tamed the elements not with brute force, but with the quiet intelligence of observation and adaptation. High above the prayer halls of Tibet's ancient monasteries, an invisible alchemy of sound unfolds. Those curved ceilings aren't just architectural choices, they're finely tuned instruments, resonating with frequencies that transform human voices into something otherworldly. When monks engage in overtone singing, their chants don't merely echo, they bloom as the vaulted surfaces above selectively amplify specific harmonic frequencies. This isn't accidental acoustics, it's sonic architecture perfected over centuries, where every contour serves a sacred purpose. The secret lies in the precise relationship between the singer's positions and the ceiling's geometry. Stand too close to the walls and the effect dissipates, but find the sweet spot directly beneath the apex, and suddenly your voice isn't just heard, it multiplies, as if the very stones have learned to harmonize. This phenomenon goes beyond mere amplification. Certain Tibetan ceilings act like natural filters, enhancing the upper harmonics of throat singing while dampening lower tones. The result, a shimmering, ethereal quality that seems to detach from the physical voice, hovering in the air like aural incense. Modern acoustic studies reveal how these ancient builders achieved this. The curvature creates interference patterns that reinforce frequencies between 1000 and 3000 Hz, the exact range where overtones naturally occur in Tibetan chant. It's as if the ceilings were designed to catch these fleeting sonic glimmers and weave them into something tangible. The monastery of Gyantse holds one of the most striking examples. Its main chapel ceiling incorporates a series of nearly invisible stepped recesses, not decorative, but functioning like the baffles in a modern recording studio. These subtle irregularities scatter sound waves just enough to prolong the decay of specific tones, creating the illusion that sacred syllables linger in space long after the monk's breath has faded. Similar acoustic sorcery appears in Bhutan's Takchang Monastery, where the ceiling's wooden latticework hides hollow chambers that resonate at the fundamental frequency of ritual bells, causing the entire space to hum sympathetically during ceremonies. What's astonishing is how universal this acoustic wisdom proves to be. The domed ceilings of Ethiopia's rock-hewn churches achieve comparable effects for Coptic chant, while the parabolic vaults above Islamic Sufi zikr chambers amplify the repetitive invocation of God's names into a pulsating wave of sound. In Greece's Orthodox monasteries, hemispherical ceilings above the chanter's stand create a phenomenon called the whispering gallery effect, allowing a single voice to be heard with unnatural clarity throughout the nave, a feature still used today during Easter vigils. The real magic lies in how these spaces train the ear as much as they transform the voice. In Japan's Shingon Buddhist temples, ceiling designs that amplify the monk's rapid-fire mantra recitation also create standing waves that listeners perceive as a secondary, slower rhythm, an auditory illusion that practitioners believe mirrors the simultaneity of earthly and divine time. Similarly, the Navajo Hogan's circular ceiling doesn't just carry sound. It blends individual voices into a unified resonance, embodying the cultural ideal of Hoja harmony and balance. Modern science is only beginning to decode these ancient sonic secrets. Laser vibrometry studies at Portugal's Mafra Palace revealed how its Baroque ceilings' intricate carvings function like acoustic diffusers, breaking up sound waves to prevent muddiness during choral performances. Meanwhile, researchers at MIT have modeled the ceiling of Istanbul's Süleymaniye Mosque, discovering that its 62 domes create cascading reverberation patterns perfectly timed for the cadence of Quranic recitation. Perhaps the most profound lesson these sacred echoes offer is about intentionality. In a world where we often design spaces first for visual impact, these ceilings remind us that architecture can, and perhaps should, speak to all the senses. They challenge us to reconsider what we might be missing when we focus only on what meets the eye and ignore the invisible harmonies waiting to be unlocked just above our heads. The next time you find yourself beneath a vaulted ceiling, try listening not just to the sounds within the space, but to the space itself. It might just be singing back. From star maps to secret chambers, ancient ceilings are far more than architectural afterthoughts. They're time capsules of human ingenuity, faith, and rebellion. These soaring canvases of stone and pigment hold the whispers of civilizations that understood a profound truth. What we overlook often carries the deepest significance. While walls shouted propaganda and declared power, ceilings became the quiet archivists of everything too sacred, too dangerous, or too revolutionary to display at eye level. Consider the irony: these masterpieces of engineering and artistry were crafted in spaces most people never thought to examine. The same human tendency to focus straight ahead, to prioritize the obvious, became the perfect shield for preserving fragile truths. A fresco on a wall might be whitewashed by conquering armies, but a celestial map painted across a vault, a coded message carved into a rooftop beam. Those survived because they escaped notice, hidden not in darkness but in plain sight. This duality, visibility and invisibility, is what makes ceilings such powerful storytellers. They reveal what cultures valued enough to protect, but also what they feared enough to conceal. The mathematical precision of Islamic muqarnas, the forbidden symbols in cathedral vaults, the star charts guiding Egyptian priests, each was an act of defiance against forgetting. These weren't just decorative choices, they were deliberate acts of cultural preservation, ensuring that even if books burned and languages faded, the knowledge would remain, floating just beyond the reach of time's erasure. The legacy of these hidden heights challenges how we engage with history today. In an era of information overload, where every surface screams for attention, ancient ceilings invite us to rediscover the lost art of looking up, literally and metaphorically. They remind us that real understanding often lies beyond the obvious, in the spaces we've trained ourselves to ignore. Whether it's the fingerprints of an enslaved artisan pressed into plantation plaster or the resonant frequencies of a Tibetan chant lingering in wooden beams, these overlooked narratives refuse to stay silent. So the next time you step into an ancient space, pause before you leave, tilt your head back, scan the shadows between the gold leaf and frescoes. What seems like mere ornamentation might just be a breadcrumb left across centuries, a fleeting glimpse of someone's world, their fears, their brilliance, their quiet resistance. History isn't just ahead of you, it's above you, waiting for the curious, the patient, the ones who dare to break their gaze from the expected and search the spaces we were never taught to see. If this journey through hidden heights has shifted your perspective, share what surprised you most in the comments. And on your next adventure, whether it's a grand cathedral or your own local library, remember, the most extraordinary stories aren't always at eye level. Sometimes truth